Hello, everybody. This is John Felt. This is the weekly weather briefing, February 17th, 2019. Well, right now we have a jet stream that is digging over the western U.S. The shades of coloring here are pockets of energy that are rotating around there. So the jet stream is coming out here and it's ejecting out here into the middle part of the nation, bringing some energy and eventually some winter weather in this region as well. But we have a lot of cold air associated with this dip in the jet stream, and we have some milder air associated with this bulging to the north of the jet stream over the southeast U.S. So over the last 24 hours, this is the temperature change. So we are getting a bit of a reprieve with some milder air pushing into the middle part of the country, as indicated with the red, while behind that some colder air. But it's still well below normal over many areas. Not as much as we saw over the last week, but we still have areas that are over 20 degrees below normal over parts of the nation, especially this area right in here, the northern plains. It's interesting to see the dew points here. Dew points are a measure of the low-level moisture, are in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and that's part of the setup. I'm going to be talking a lot about heavy rain over the southeast U.S., and this moisture pushing north is setting the stage. It's also perhaps a sign of spring as we start to get that push of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Not unusual for late February for the southeast U.S. So over the last week, you can see we had really a contrast in temperature. Here was the dividing line right here. We had unusually cold weather over the upper plains, upper Midwest, unusually mild weather over the south central, southeast U.S., and along that clash between those two air masses, that's where we had our most active weather, including some very heavy rain here over the Ohio River Valley. That's resulted in flooding over the lower Ohio into the lower Mississippi. We also had quite a bit of heavy rain over the western part of the U.S., including California, and that resulted in flooding over parts of California, significant flooding. Interesting to look at where we had the number of rain days in the last 30 days. Areas that have been unusually wet have been the west coast of the U.S. and also this area here over the Ohio River Valley. Areas that have been very, very dry have been parts of the south central U.S., and drought is beginning to emerge in this area. Now, it's interesting, I talked about this a bit in one of my posts this week, but I wanted to sort of reinforce it. These are composites for this time of year, precipitation composites that say what has occurred during past El Niños. So it's been very wet in this area during past El Niños, and look at that. That looks pretty close. And we had that atmospheric river coming in here, tapping that moisture from the equatorial Pacific, and we are now seeing a connection between these warm waters and the atmosphere. So NOAA issued a El Nino advisory on Friday, and we do see some signs here of that connection. Now, on the other hand, look at this here. This area is expected to be very, very dry during past El Ninos. It was, and it's been very, very wet. So not all that simple. Some areas of the country we see a pretty good connection, and other parts of the country not. Over the last week, we are adding our snow. I'm going to put that on my list of things to research and write about this week in relation to spring snowmelt flood potential. But what we have here is a lot of snow on the ground here. We've added some snow in Wisconsin, significant snow. This is what occurred last week. Heavy snow in Wisconsin early in the week. Band of snow coming through the upper Midwest later in the week. So now we have quite a bit of snow on the ground, and that'll eventually melt. And with a cold pattern, that might stay on the ground later than we expect. And the longer it stays on the ground, we don't reduce that risk by managed melting, so that increases the risk for spring snowmelt. I got a lot more to talk about that later this week. As far as soil moisture goes, you can see we have very wet soils here. More modest soils here. I want to point this out because I'm going to be talking about heavy rain in this area. Not so much here. If the next band of rain came over this area, we'd even be in more trouble. But it looks like it's going to be a little bit further to the south. You can see right now that because of all the past rain, we have a flood wave coming down the Ohio and the lower Mississippi all the way down to the Gulf. We also have tributaries running quite high further north as well. Okay, so let's look at the forecast here, the jet stream forecast, and maybe the best way to look at it is let's sort of concentrate on this dip in the jet stream right here, and what does it do over the next 14 days? It pulls back up to the north. It sort of flattens out in the western U.S., pulls up to the north, and what happens to this ridge of high pressure? Well, that looks like that's pretty much stays in place here for the most part over the next 14 days. So the two patterns, this begins to pull up to the northeast, this sort of stays where it's at. Now let's see what temperatures do. Let's again look at this pocket of cold air. What does that do? It starts here, very widespread. It gradually pulls up to the northeast, sort of spreads into even parts of the Midwest. So anywhere in this area here, it's looking like unusually cold weather right into the first week of March at least. Let's look at this warm weather. Well, it stays in place for a while, but it gradually diminishes as this cold air overtakes more and more of the nation as we get into late February and early March. Okay, so this week we do have a very active system developing towards the middle of the week, and that's going to be one of the big stories this week. You can see the beginning of it right here, and that's going to result in very, very heavy rain over a large part of the Tennessee River and southeast U.S., parts of the southeast U.S. You can even see 7 inches of rain in spots, 6 inches, very widespread. So this is, when I look at flood potential, I look at a couple things. I look not only at the quantity of rain, but the distribution, and we have a very widespread distribution. So this is going to be a big flood producer over this area. All the tributaries in here, and then this is eventually running into the lower Mississippi. It's going to reinforce the flood crest on the Mississippi. We also are going to have some snow in this area, but not as much rain over the west coast as we saw last week. Now, if we look at where the heaviest snow is, right over Iowa for the most part. It's a band that's coming through here. Heavy amounts of snow over Iowa. We do have winter weather watches and warnings for that area. And if you remember where my snow cover map was, we already have an extensive snow cover in this area, so this is going to bring it down even more. So we're going to end up by the end of the week with quite a bit of snow cover. Okay, let's look out a little bit further, 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day. Well, I think I've already talked about how this is going, the cold air is going to expand, so we're getting into week 2. Other than the southeast U.S., Florida is going to be awful nice with that mild weather, and I'm sure lots of people are down there. This is a good year to get down there if you can, because large parts of the country are going to be unusually cold. As far as precipitation goes, it looks like the wet pattern looks like it could continue right from the next 2 weeks over the southeast U.S. So this rain this week might not be the end of it. It could even be wet into weeks 3 and 4, and that's what we see here. Here's weeks 3 and 4. So over the western U.S., the western half of the U.S., we're looking at the possibility of 3 to 4 weeks with below normal temperatures. Really no sign here of above normal temperatures changing this pattern right through at least mid-March. And I'm afraid that the southeast U.S. and other parts, Tennessee River Valley, are going to be under the gun for increased heavy rain and the threat of flooding for a while now. So again, I wanted to just sort of point out this is actually not this week's rain, but next week's still more chance of rain. And I looked at some of the probabilities in the 12 to 14 day. This is above 80%, 85% probability of excessive rain, so it looks very, very likely that there will be a continued active pattern over the southeast U.S. Again, this is this week, moderate risk for enhanced inflows. This is very significant heavy rain, the heaviest rain, but anywhere in this yellow is where the heaviest rain will be. Winter weather advisories in this area, winter storm up in this area. So for this week, unusually cold, unusually wet, and some messy winter weather over the parts of the northeast as well. So that's this week's weather forecast. We've been in a very busy pattern, and it looks like that busy pattern is going to continue again as we go through the week.